Welcome to First Time for Everything, a podcast for curious people. I'm your host, Danny Elliott. I've toured the world as a backing vocalist for some of the biggest names in music, owned a prop rental business, ran a vintage boutique out of a camper I renovated, and have had a lot of firsts in my life. I created this podcast in hopes of inspiring you to take a chance on something you've been wanting to try for the first time. We're going to discover a lot of really cool stuff together, and I'm so happy you're here. Welcome back, first timers, or welcome if this is the first episode you're tuning into. We've got a gem on today's episode, the insanely gifted Broadway actor and recording artist, Morgan James. Morgan is a graduate of the very hard to get into Juilliard School, has been in 5 Broadway productions in addition to many other shows, and is also a successful recording and touring artist. We talk about being bad at auditioning, how much you can actually make on Broadway, and learning to not lose your mind over not being where you want to be by the time you think you're supposed to be there. Let me say that one more time. Learning not to lose your mind over not being where you want to be by the time you think you're supposed to be there. If that is not a word, nothing is. On that note, I think you're going to really enjoy First Time Being on Broadway with Morgan James. All right, we're here today with Morgan James. I'm so excited to have you here.
So nice to be here.
So
Thanks
good
for having me, Danny.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure, treasure. Thank you for being on. Yeah, so today we're going to talk about first time being on Broadway, which is super exciting. I know a lot of my vocal coaching clients are like aspiring to be on Broadway or just like are big fans of Broadway. So I thought this would be a fun episode, especially for that crowd. Yeah.
I mean, I was, when you approached me about this subject, I was like, okay, I should remember back. Back to it was many moons ago, but I was remembering back to so I could relay it in detail to you.
Well, we're gonna try and hit it blow by blow. So we'll start from the beginning. But how did you get interested in theater and then like decide that you wanted to be in theater?
My parents brought me up on musical theater. My dad was my drama teacher, actually.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And before that, you know, he was a drama teacher at other schools. And I remember really, really getting the bug for musical theater, like 5th grade. My dad directed Into the Woods and
classic.
Sunset Boulevard came out that year. And my dad and I would listen to musical theater a lot together. My mom kind of brought me up on like Funny Girl and Chorus Line, and they had all those records. So I really started to become a musical theater nerd, you know, in junior high and high school. And I started doing community theater and taking voice lessons and joining choir. And then when my dad got hired at my high school and started to do like all my favorite shows, and I just had this really magical experience. All my friends were in theater, and I pretty quickly kind of knew that I wanted to experience that someday. That became my dream. My goal was to be on Broadway.
Yeah, I was wondering like if that was always kind of the thing, like the goal from the beginning, or if it kind of started to just evolve and then it was like, yeah, this is what I want to do.
I think being on Broadway was my goal and my dream from about 7th grade on. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's funny because when you look back on things you achieve or things you experience, it feels destined, right? It feels like, oh, of course, this would always happen. But at the time, it felt like such a struggle because compared to so many of my peers, it took me a very, very long time to get my first Broadway show. And so when you look at it from, okay, I really wanted this from about 12 on, and it didn't happen until I was almost 30. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
it's a long time dreaming of something. So yeah, it felt good to just get it done and say I did it. You know, you always, especially in New York when you're first starting out, everybody says, "What do you do here?" when you're waiting tables, and you say, "I'm an actress." "Oh, what have you been in?" And you're like, "Nothing."
Yeah.
And it's the age-old horrible, like, then I go crawl into a closet and cry.
We have all been there, like,
yes.
Quite literally.
Yes, yes. So it's just a tale as old as time when you're kind of starting out in New York. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh, you just took me right back to doing that, except, not the theater version, but the artist version of it for sure. Working restaurant jobs and then, finishing at 10, going to the studio to record until like midnight, 1, 2, and then just same thing all over again, auditions like for backing vocal stuff. And I'm sure it's a very similar schedule.
Yeah, yeah, it
Yeah.
is. And it's everybody who is not in the business, well, or I should say not everybody, many people who are not in the music or theater business, they just don't understand why we're not famous, why we're not rich, and or why they don't know us, or what do I know you from? And it's this kind of constant pull at
Mhm.
what it means to succeed in what we do, you know?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. When did you start auditioning for Broadway shows? And like how long did it take from you starting to audition to you landing that show around 30?
Um, I started auditioning when I was in school at Juilliard. I
Mhm.
actually had my first major Broadway audition. It was kind of insane, and I had no idea how insane it was until much, much later. But basically, Marvin Hamlish was writing his what became his last show, which was called Sweet Smell of Success.
Mhm.
Craig Carnelia did the lyrics. Nick Heitner was directing it. Like all star. John Guare wrote the book. All star cast. All star team. And Marvin had gone to Juilliard and was really, really fond of, wanted to find some unknown kid.
Mhm.
So they came, and there were like two of us interested in musical theater at the entire school at that time. It was really not anybody interested. So I auditioned when I was like 20 for this musical. Got all the way to the end, like final callbacks.
Mhm.
Had no idea what I was doing. Had no idea how big this was, and
Mhm.
definitely thought I'm going to book this show. Definitely thought I was going to book the show. And I thought this is going to be so easy. I go to Juilliard and then I book a Broadway show, and it's like life is so simple, right? And spoiler alert, I did not book that show, and it was not easy, and it was not simple. So I was auditioning off and on. I got it through that audition. That team helped me get an agent right out of school. I started auditioning essentially right out of school to kind of no avail. Like I got close to a few things, but I was a terrible auditioner. I didn't understand branding or my look, or the fact that my look didn't match my sound. I had terrible headshots. I had terrible style. I couldn't dress myself. It I was a lot. I was coming out of, a very conservative training at Juilliard. I didn't know how to use my chest voice. I didn't understand the world.
Mm.
So through not getting any work is really how I found myself and found how I was going to eventually succeed. And I just started auditioning for lots and lots of regional theater and booked some leads out of town and learned a lot.
Mhm.
And I started auditioning for every workshop and every, you know, lab and reading. And I am a good sight reader and sight singer. So I started working at NYU Musical Theater Program, singing demos and singing new works for all the new writers,
Cool.
which was huge, and that's how I met a lot of great up and coming writers and casting agents and other actors. And so, yeah, so the whole time I was waiting tables and babysitting and tutoring and bartending, I never stopped auditioning. And
Mm.
I just, it's a testament to how terrible I am at auditioning
You
that
know,
it
that
took me that long.
actually makes me feel so good to hear because like not because I'm like so happy you had a terrible time.
Yeah.
But I respect you so much and I love your voice so much and it's so mind-boggling to me that you wouldn't just get the first thing you auditioned for. But I also am not a great auditioner and so like I think it actually is like really validating for people pursuing this to hear that you can have a very successful career and it's okay if there's this one aspect of the job that you're not so incredible at. Like these other opportunities will come because you're just showing up and you continue to show up to do this thing that you love in spite of like one piece of the puzzle not necessarily being everything that like you kind of want it to be, you know?
Yeah.
Like what was your mindset through that time? I know I definitely went through a lot of dark stages when I was like getting those final callbacks, thinking like this is going to be the job that changes my career trajectory, and then like not getting it by like one person. How did you navigate that?
I My manager Ted has been with me from the beginning, essentially. We've been working together since I met him when I was still in school, and we've been working together ever since I left school. So he's really seen the entire trajectory of what I've
Mm,
done, and he had to be the one to tell me every job I got and every job I didn't get. And he had to be the one to make those calls. And so he's hurt. Looking back, it makes me laugh that, like, wow, you cried over Sister Act the musical. Like, you cried about the dumbest things that now I like, frankly, you couldn't pay me to do some of the things that I really cried about, you know? Um, I didn't take it well. Like, I don't think I ever got better at the rejection. I don't think I
mm,
ever got better at at accepting the fact that I felt that I wasn't accepted for how I looked and how I sounded. I felt like I didn't have a place. I wasn't invited into the clique. It is a childhood fear. Like
mm,
it's the not being included feeling. It's the
yeah.
rejection feeling. And I think to this day, it's why I don't audition anymore. I
Mm,
don't go in for anything. I don't make self tapes. I don't audition for anything. And there have been projects that come along that I go, you know what? That project sounds like it might be fun, but it's not worth it to my spirit to go
mm,
through an audition process. I left that behind when I started making music full time. And for better or for worse, I just don't think that I can do that again. And
yeah.
when there have been times when people are like, oh, you should do film and TV, for instance, I think to myself, that would be really, really neat to do. But I know myself well enough to know that embarking on another audition journey is so damaging to myself.
Mm,
So that the long answer is, or the short answer is, I didn't handle it well, and I think that the only reason I kept at it is because I am tenacious and I'm resilient in other ways.
mm,
And I started booking work based on other work I had done. I
yeah.
never booked a job on an audition. I booked a job on, no, you should hire her. She's actually really good. Or
Same.
you should hire her. She's a good sight reader. You should hire her. She's fun. I never booked a job based on she walked in the room and blew us away. It was all based on relationships and people knowing that I was good for it.
Yeah, that I feel that like same exact same thing. It's like, yeah, you can go on the road with her. She's not going to drive you crazy having to
Right.
spend 24/7 together. Cool. And I think it's also assumed that like you can do the job, at a certain point. It's like I feel like it almost more in some ways depends on like the hang. Like people would rather make sure that you're cool and they're not going to go crazy spending time together.
Yeah.
But I'm so glad you kept at it because obviously it led you to where you are now making great music that we all get to enjoy. So, yeah, what did your first job on Broadway end up being?
So the first Broadway show that I did was The Addams Family with Nathan Lane and Bebe Neuwirth.
Fun.
And I got that because I learned pretty quickly that you have to get in on the ground up. You have to be involved from a very early stage in a new musical. And I had met the music director, Mary Mitchell Campbell, and at doing some new musical out of town, and we became friends. And when it came time to do the Addams Family workshop, she suggested me, and I got to do the very first reading. And there I tried to make myself irreplaceable,
Yeah.
essentially. Every workshop I did, I tried to do that, to make myself very valuable. And so from there, I got more readings, more workshops, and more shows. And being on the ground floor level was how I got every single show that I ultimately did.
Mm.
Because then I'm getting to know the people in the room as and showing them my actual work, not my this is what I can do in an audition kind of work.
Yeah.
That's yeah. From once the door was open, it took me a long time to get my first Broadway show, but once the door was open, I did five back to back very, very quickly.
Amazing.
So it does get a lot easier once you prove that you have done it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, same thing again. There's so many parallels I wasn't expecting between backing vocals and that. When you booked that first show, what was that first day of rehearsal like when you're like, wow, I'm actually about to embark on this journey? Do you remember what those feelings were? It was like this is my gig.
I felt relief. I really,
Mm,
really, when Ted called me and said that they were going to be moving forward with me attached, I felt really relieved because I really was starting. I had gone through so many different things to the point of giving up.
mm,
Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe I'm wrong about my own skills. Maybe I should leave. I had gone through so many emotions. So just the relief of I set a goal. I've met the goal.
yeah.
We were also rehearsing to go out of town, so it's a little bit of a delayed gratification because we were rehearsing. I did several workshops of it, but by the time were rehearsing for the out of town, we were rehearsing to go to Chicago for 3 months. So you really don't. You're rehearsing for several weeks, and then you go to Chicago for a few months, and then you rehearse again, and then you're on Broadway. So
Mm,
yeah, I mean, it was a lot more tedious and boring than I ever expected. You think it's going to be this nonstop excitement, and it's not. It's your job. It's
mm,
definitely a job. It's definitely a hard job, long
mm,
hours, especially when you're in the ensemble and you're covering roles. It's
mm.
sometimes thankless, sometimes it's very, very tiring, and I didn't expect that. I
Yeah.
don't think. I think I expected it to be. But there are also magic things that I miss to this day, like the camaraderie that is
Yeah.
just hard
So
to replicate.
special.
Yeah.
Yeah, I started out in musical theater in high school and college, and that is such a singular experience. I've never felt that same kind of camaraderie. I mean, being in band is somewhat similar, but there's still just an energy that I think theater people have that's really special. That can also
Yeah.
be insane sometimes.
True. True.
But it's so fun and it's so special, and you really feel like it feels very present, like you're really experiencing that moment in time.
Yeah.
What was the rehearsal schedule like? I guess also maybe it's different when you're doing a show that's like an original show versus like you stepping into a show that's already on Broadway.
Well,
But
the
like,
rehearsal schedule is the same. You
okay,
may have a shorter period if you're coming as a replacement. You may have 1 week of rehearsals, then you're on.
wow.
But the Broadway schedule is when you're in rehearsals before previews, you rehearse like 10 to 6. Then when you're in tech, you're basically going 10 to 10, essentially, like
Yeah.
a lot of 12-hour days. And then you start previews at night and you rehearse during the day. Then when you're in performance and you're an understudy, you're doing 8 shows a week, and then you're also doing rehearsal on Thursday and Friday.
Good
And
Lord.
yeah, so really the only full true day off you have is Monday.
That's crazy. I mean,
Yeah, it
what
is.
did you do to take care of yourself during that time? Because it seems like you really have to stay on top of your vocal health, your physical health to be able to maintain that kind of rigorous schedule.
Yeah, the it's funny because when people ask me now, how do you deal with the tour schedule you have? I really attribute it to the Broadway schedule. And I
Mm,
say that is what taught me how you get like 2 personal days a year. You get 2 vacation weeks a year. Um, and you have to give it your best 8 shows a week plus rehearsals. And so that really taught me about the stamina. Prior to getting my first Broadway show, I was very poor and I never really drank before that. So
mm,
the it wasn't a question of having to limit, I already pretty much didn't drink very much, drank a lot of water, got a lot of rest. You can't really schedule a lot outside of work because
mm.
you'll pay at night. And
Yeah.
it's hard to get anything done in the morning because you don't get home, depending on where you live, you don't get home from your show till 11:30. Then you're wired and you're hungry and
Hmm.
you want to eat a bunch of crap at midnight and then you don't wake up till noon and it's a
Hmm.
totally different life.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, you really have to take care of yourself, and the Broadway schedule is there's just nothing like it in terms of how disciplined those people are. Like I have so much respect, particularly in like heavy physical shows, dance
Mm,
shows. I'm just that my respect is has no end.
yeah. Oh my gosh. If you feel comfortable talking about this, because I always appreciate transparency on the financial side of any career because I feel like it helps people just kind of make better informed decisions. Like, what is the pay like for a Broadway show? And I'm sure it varies role to role depending on ensemble versus a lead role or something, and I'm sure it varies based on the show maybe the success of the show as well.
There,
But
there are minimums. I mean,
sure.
the pay doesn't really have anything to do with the success of the show because all of
Okay.
the shows have minimums.
So it's
Based
unionized or
It's unionized. Yeah,
okay.
Actors Equity is our union, such that it is.
Hmm.
And the when I was last in an ensemble, the minimum. Now, granted, this was 12 years ago, so the
Hmm.
minimum was 1850 a week.
Okay.
I think the minimums are up to like 2400 a week now
Okay.
for an ensemble minimum.
Okay.
That's not with any overages, that's not with any covering, and that's not with going on. Now, granted, that sounds like a lot of money, but that's before taxes and before commissions. So if you think about, let's say 1800 back in my day, when I was in an Adams Family, I was making, let's say 1850 a week.
Hmm.
And then I paid 15% to my manager,
Hmm.
I paid 10% to my agent,
Hmm.
and then taxes and union, my what's it called? My insurance and
Hmm.
my pension, health and
Hmm.
pension. So I walked home with about 700.
And in New York City,
Yeah,
that does not take you very far.
it does not take you very far. So it's not now, of course, it goes up from there based on what your role is, and
Mm.
you know, Nathan was making 75,000 a week.
Sure.
His name
Sure.
was above the title. So
Yeah.
it goes, the sky's the limit in terms of how much money this show has. Playing a lead or a secondary lead, you're obviously making a lot more than the ensemble, and you can make a lot of money. However, unlike a film, there are no residuals. So
Mm.
when the show is over, the money's over.
Yeah, it's basically like an hourly job in a
Yeah.
way. It's like
Yeah.
you're not getting paid unless you're there.
Yep. You're not
And
getting paid unless you're there, and you are, when the show is done, you're out of money.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's similar with touring too, right? It's like
Yep.
unless you're on the road, you are not making money. Except, if you have records out, hopefully people, I mean, but
Who's making
who's
money on
buying
records?
records,
Yeah.
right? Right. Women's health is extremely important to me, and I think modern fertility is one of the most exciting, accessible new advancements to come out in recent years to help us really understand our bodies more. Whether you're ready to pop out a mini me like yesterday, or the thought of being someone's parent after the night you had last night seems light years away, knowledge is power. Understanding how our bodies work to better be able to prepare for the future and take better care of ourselves right now is game changing. Modern fertility doesn't just offer fertility testing, it also offers birth control, prenatal vitamins, ovulation and pregnancy tests, and just launched a sperm kit. Because fertility isn't just a woman's job, okay? So click the link in the show notes for $10 off your modern fertility hormone test and join the thousands of women who refuse to let fertility be a mystery. Now, back to the show. How long did that first show run for? Or how long were you in it for?
I stayed in it we opened in April and I left in November. So
Okay.
I stayed in it. I was in it a year if you consider the out of town.
Mm-hmm.
And then I left to do my next Broadway show, which was Wonderland.
Mm-hmm.
I went out of town with that to Tampa, and then we came in, previewed, and then we closed after 24 performances, which was
Mm-hmm.
devastating.
Mm.
That happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that I'm sure people who aren't in this industry don't even think about too. It's like you never know how long a show is going to last for and like how long you have job security for, which I feel like is even more tumultuous than being like a touring side person because at least you're like, okay, this run is going to go X amount of months and it's like Broadway, you can get canceled at any time, right?
Yeah.
And that's just
It's
it.
the constant fear.
Yeah.
And the jobs like Hamilton or Phantom are very rare. The unpredictability is really the standard,
Mm.
especially in this day and age. It's even worse now.
Yeah.
It's worse now.
Yeah. And it seems difficult to kind of when you're coming home with $700 a week, like how do you even prepare for downtime between jobs? It's not like you can save, right? It's like you have to immediately like pick up some temporary gig while you're auditioning for the next thing. And
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
So I guess you ended up doing 5 Broadway shows back to back, right?
Pretty
Is that what
much. I did the Adams Family, then Wonderland.
you?
Then when Wonderland closed unexpectedly, or quicker than we anticipated. Then I did some regional theater in the summer while I was auditioning for my next show.
Hmm.
I was doing a bunch of workshops at the same time, trying to, and booked Godspell,
Hmm.
which I had booked actually in 2008, and it got canceled because again, the theme
Yeah.
of the day is tumultuousness. And so I did Godspell, and then right after, while I was doing Godspell, I was doing workshops for Motown.
Mm.
So you constantly have to have your finger in a lot of pies, and you constantly have to have the next one lined up. So then I did Motown for almost a year,
Hmm.
a little over a year with all the workshops and everything, maybe a year and a half. And then when I was in Motown, I got right before I did Motown on Broadway, I got my record deal.
Mm.
So I knew that I was going to try to transition out of doing 8 shows a week.
Yeah.
So when I met Mr. Gordy, when I first auditioned for Motown, and I got to know him through the workshops. I think we did maybe two, three, four workshops, a lab, a reading. So over the course of those months, I got to know him, and he basically was the reason I got a record deal at Sony at Epic Records. And I signed right before we started Motown. So I was a new artist on the label and doing 8 shows a week. So I was going to studios from midnight to 5 in the morning, sometimes recording demos for the label or going in the morning before a show. And I look back on that period and everyone's like, gosh, you got so thin, you looked crazy. And I was like, yeah, I wasn't trying. It was just I was trying to do everything all at once.
Mm.
So, so yeah, so while I was doing Motown, I was doing all that.
I'm exhausted just hearing that
Yeah,
schedule.
yeah.
Also, what was your vocal health like at that point? Like, did you have any issues? Were you okay? Like, I know for me, I don't have a big voice. Like my voice, I have to be very strategic about how I use it. And she doesn't like to do schedules like that. She will go out. It's just,
Oh, no,
like
mine is like the old mule that will just keep pulling the cart. No, I don't get vocally tired. I don't get everything else will quit on me before my voice will quit.
mm,
So I didn't have any vocal troubles. I never have,
amazing.
knock on everything, but I didn't get my mind and my mental health and my body started to suffer.
Mm,
The anxiety of trying to do it all, the physical demands of trying to do it all, the lack of rest.
sure.
But my voice never quit. My voice
That
never quit. And
that's
that's the problem is
incredible.
people will just they'll see that and then they want to keep making me do more. So it was a lot, I wrote and recorded my whole first record while I was still at doing Motown at night.
Ooh.
I remember going to I would go all day long and do vocal sessions and in a studio that was around the corner from Motown,
Hmm.
in Times Square so that I could like run and make my half hour. And
Wow.
it was just too much looking back.
Yeah.
And when I put in my notice at Motown, there's kind of an industry unspoken thing where you always have to have something else to go to. God forbid your show closes and you don't have something else, and
Right.
you only leave a show to go do something else because
Yeah.
again, we're so trained to try to combat this instability.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden I felt this thing inside me that I was getting very resentful to go to work.
Mm.
And I was complaining a lot about work. And that's
Mm.
not really like me to do. Like I love my job. So I would say to my husband, I would come home and he was like, "You just don't seem happy." Even though I loved the people and I loved doing my job, my body was starting to just reject it. And so I said, there are people out there that really, really want this job. Just the same way I really wanted this job when I first started. And if you're not going to be grateful, if you're not going to be joyful, and you don't want to be here, you shouldn't be here. So I put in my 4 weeks notice with nothing
Mm.
coming up. I basically had a new record in the can, but Epic wasn't doing anything it was kind of like we were waiting to master it and waiting for a release schedule. And I had no tour dates because I had no fan base. I had no touring apparatus because I'd never been on tour. I had no way to make money. But I knew that I couldn't stay where I was. So I put in my 4 weeks notice and I just went out on the trust limb and I didn't know what was going to happen.
That is it's such a scary thing to do, and it's such a brave thing to do. It's so like Morgan, I relate to this so much. Like every single thing you just said was the exact conversation I had with Matt when I decided to stop touring as a backing vocalist. It's like same every single point. Yeah. So how long was it before stuff started happening with your record or that side of your career after you left the show?
Uh, it took a while to get dates going. I just signed with, or no, I didn't even have, I'm trying to think of the timeline. Epic really had no tour support vibe. They didn't really have any way to help me build my fan base. They were kind of useless when it came to that. They were getting me on some radio stuff and we were recording a couple of videos and stuff, but I think that the thing that really started tipping it over was when I made a couple videos with PMJ, and that's how I built my fan base.
Okay.
And I just started kind of doing festivals and doing little runs here and there. And I remember playing some markets and there being 10, 20 people there. And I had to like start completely from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully I had Doug, my now husband, was touring with me from the start. But it was really a struggle at the beginning, especially coming from the Broadway world where you don't have to deal with any of the logistics. You just show up.
Yeah.
So the thing that I grew so tired of in the Broadway world, which was that I had no control and that I had no say in anything, I discovered as I started to go out on my own, oh wow, this is very, very hard. I have to do everything myself.
Yeah.
So it's really you gain an appreciation for them both by experiencing them both back to
Sure.
back.
Sure.
So I think that the simple version is it took me about 6 years of touring before I really could do a run and succeed.
Mm.
I think it took me about 6 or 7 years before I started to make money on the road.
Yeah, it just feels like everything is an investment, right? And it's like constant belief in yourself or that you have to kind of have even when you don't actually like you're having those down moments where you're like like am I delusional? But you have to remind yourself, no, I know that I can do this. Mainly I love it. And what else am I going to do? Am I going to, like I love to do this thing and it's going to happen because it has to happen.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of fortitude to pursue that. And I have so much respect for that because it's
Yeah.
not easy, but
Thank you.
it's clearly working out. She's killing the game. And you have a new record coming out, right?
I have a new record coming out March 31st. It's called Nobody's Fool.
And it's gonna be so good. And I also too really quickly because we'll just throw this in there in the mix as well. So when was it? 2018 you did the all-female Jesus Christ Superstar. Was it 2017?
Yeah, 2017. And we recorded it in 2018. Yes.
Okay. For anyone who has not experienced this, you have to go check it out online. I have to say, so I feel very lucky that I got to see it at Highline when you guys did the concert
right.
of it. It was like one of the most memorable musical experiences I think I've ever had. I was just standing there, like my feet were killing me because I stupidly wore heels to like a standing room only show. And I was like, I don't even care. I will let my sciatica just like burn my legs to the ground before I leave. This is so fucking good.
Oh my God, thank you.
It was so good. Is that something that will ever go to Broadway? Because I feel like it would be incredibly successful.
I think it would too. Andrew Lloyd Webber and his people do not want that to happen, and they have said no. And we were supposed to do it in London. We had theater lined up, and we were going to do a couple of nights of it in concert, and he flat out said no. Yeah, so they don't want that to happen.
So he doesn't like making money is what we're saying. Like, because clearly
he doesn't like change. He doesn't like change, and he doesn't like things that aren't his idea, and neither do his people. And I'll say one small thing about that project. That project is probably the thing I'm most proud that I've ever done, and I really, really love that recording. We recorded the entire score. The cast, the orchestra is incredible. But I will say that process really, really almost broke my spirit because I pretty much raised all the money myself, and outside of I had my friends Tori and Richard helped me cast it, but I did all the asks, and I sang Jesus, and
Mm.
I co-produced the album, and then I was tasked with kind of all the legalities and the logistics and dealing with the machine that is Andrew Lloyd Webber and his people was crushing.
I believe it.
So I I wish we could do a run of it in concert or a tour or a Broadway run, but it's not going to happen as long as he is at the helm,
Mm. Yeah.
unfortunately.
Well, in the meantime, for anyone listening, the record's available for streaming at least,
Yeah,
right?
it's on all streaming. It's
Yeah.
also available. Physical copies and T-shirts are available on my website.
Get the
Um,
physical copies, get the merch, buy
yes,
all the things, people. It's so like it's so freaking good.
thank
I
you.
can't
The
say
cast
enough.
is incredible. It's Shoshana
Yes.
Bean, Cynthia Erivo, Lettucey, Bridget Everett. It's an incredible. Why all these people said yes is just incredible to me.
Well, because of you. That's
Oh.
why they said
Yeah, I
yes.
mean it was magical. It was truly magical. So yeah,
Mm.
it's called Jesus Christ Superstar, the all-female studio cast recording.
So freaking good. Any sort of last bits of like wisdom you want to share with people who are interested in pursuing this whole life?
Gosh. Well, I've the older I get, I come into contact, of course, with the next generation of artists and the next generation of musicians and of actors and actresses. And I see so much of myself, and I try with what limited means I have. I try to take them under my wing and give them a place to land that maybe I didn't have at the time. And I see people trying to fit into boxes and molds the way I did. And it's hard to help them not do that
Mm,
because that's what we feel we have to do.
yeah.
What I would say is it's nonlinear. And what you're meant to do is not, we try to set up our goals like they're on a timeline, like countdown ticker, and that
Mm,
if we don't get them by a certain amount of time, we've failed. And I look back, and the word success is so hard for me to talk about because there's so many times that I don't see myself as a success. And what does that even mean? It's an old version of what a success is that
mm,
I dreamed of when I was 12 years old. But if I try to be soft to myself and kind to myself and I say, I've reached all the goals that I set for myself. And isn't that kinder to say, wow, I am a success, right? I'm a success just by virtue of the fact that I make music full time,
mm,
that I have the capacity and the means to help younger people sometimes and all those things. So I would say to young people or say to people that are wanting to get into this, no matter how tempting it is to try to change yourself or rush yourself, just know that just because someone else succeeds at 22 doesn't mean that that is meant for you. Doesn't mean
mm,
that you're not going to reach those goals at another time. And the older I get, the younger I feel in a weird way.
mm.
And the rushing has slowed down. I feel more capable and more strong now than I ever did. I would never go back to my 20s.
Mm.
I don't
Yeah.
want to go back to my 20s, and the doubt and the fear and how I handled things. I'm embarrassed of my 20s self. So I feel stronger now, and not everybody is meant to make it right away and burn fast.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just think it's so easy to compare and despair.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Compare and despair. Oh man, well, that is a word from Morgan James, people. That I mean, honestly, no truer things have been said about the pursuit of doing what you love in regards to this industry for sure. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. And I'm going to put links for everybody to find you everywhere because you definitely need to be listening to Morgan's insane voice, catching her in a city near you, buying her new record. But yeah, thank you so much, woman. I appreciate you.
So much. Thanks for chatting with me. It's nice to go back in time, and it's nice for us to remind ourselves of our journey because sometimes it feels like we haven't gotten anywhere. And sometimes it's good to say, no, I have gotten places. I'm proud of the places I I've seen in this world.
I love what Morgan was saying about reminding yourself of your journey and where you've come from. And I know that can be hard sometimes because sometimes we don't like where we've come from or we feel like we should have done more. But I was just talking about this with a vocal coaching client earlier today. I think that we are exactly where we're supposed to be at this point in time. And I think that's the easiest way to kind of accept that sometimes. And I also think it's a beautiful way to accept it in that it helps you let go of regrets that you have, things you think you should have done differently, shoulda, coulda, woulda, And then we just adjust moving forward, and like Morgan was saying, don't compare and despair. Comparison is the thief of joy. And this is something I'm learning to practice. It's still a practice. It's definitely not mastered yet, but I think these are some great takeaways from today. You can find out if Morgan is playing in a city near you and pre-order her newest record, Nobody's Fool, over on her website, www.morganjamesonline.com. And she's got some gorgeous vinyl you're going to want to get your hands on. You can also keep up with her on Instagram over at Morgan A. James. You can hang out with me on Instagram at DannyOfficial and on TikTok over at FTFE Pod, First Time for Everything Pod. Please subscribe and comment on the show on whatever platform you're listening on today, as it really helps us grow our crew of first timers. And while you're at it, go ahead and share the show with someone you think might enjoy it. Just those little 3 buttons to the right. Just hit share. Send it to the first person that pops up. Let's keep it interesting. First Time for Everything is produced by Two Sheilas Productions. Our theme song, Closer, is performed by me, written by me and the Royal Foundry, and produced by the Royal Foundry. Thank you guys so much for listening today. And remember, it is never too late for your first time.